So I'm going to welcome Chris and his two panellists to the stage, and Chris can do the introductions. Warm welcome.
Got to say, that feels like an absolute stitch-up now, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
I mean, to be the panel that comes on after that, so...
Are we supposed to turn these on, or is I'm on?
Yeah, good. You should be on, I think, yes.
Good job I didn't say anything in that last session.
Just wanted to get that out of your way.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll try and do our very best to use our voices in the best way possible, but I think what we're really going to do is just have a conversation here about mental health that you're all welcome to take part in as well. So, yes, Steve mentioned the Future 100 Manifesto, which took place in May. And for those that are the new intake of the Future 100, do take up the opportunity to do that if it comes round again. It's a chance for you to take an issue that's important to you and put it to a group of media leaders to mobilise them to do something about it. Mine was mental health. And at the centre of my manifesto was to focus on mental health first aid training. So some of you may have done that in the room. My request to media leaders was to ensure that 10% of their workforce was trained as mental health first aiders, but they doubled that figure to 20% of the leadership team to make sure it becomes a boardroom issue. So we're going to explore a bit of that today with two experts who are coming at the subject from slightly different directions. So I will introduce here. We've got the lovely Lorraine Jennings-Creed, who is Director of Wellbeing Services and Culture Change at NABS. I'm assuming you know who NABS is, but you may not fully know what NABS is here to do, so we're going to rectify that. And Lorraine's been at NABS for 15 years, so there's nothing she doesn't know about NABS. And then we've also got Paul Rowlinson. So Paul, you may know, we played around with the term. We're not going to use Titan, veteran, a man who's been around this industry for some time. No, we're all in a vintage age here. He's been around the agency for a decent amount of time, and right now Paul is independent consultant. He's also a trustee at the charity Tommy's and the founder of I'mNotOK.uk, which we'll find out a bit more about in a second. So let's just kick off with a quick introduction as to why this is an issue that's close to your heart. Paul, maybe start with you.
Okay, so I worked in media for 27 years and I retired in November 2021. It wasn't long into my retirement that I realised that something wasn't quite right with me. And to cut a long story short, I got very depressed. I'd moved to Devon, made the dream move. Even the people at Mindshare used to call it doing a rollie. So, 30 odd years in the business, get your money, get out. But it led to, my wife and I having to make the decision to move back from Devon. I'd got to the point where I felt completely useless, had no value. And I had, once we'd moved back to Berkshire temporarily, I had a spell of about 3 weeks where effectively my wife was put on suicide watch because I was a high risk suicide. So that gave me an insight into what it feels like to be depressed, anxious, and also, sadly, thinking about how you would take your own life. So I've lost 3 friends to suicide, 3 close friends, all have worked in the business. And one of the things that's common to all of them is that none of them spoke about it because they were terrified about work finding out. And they didn't want to be seen as damaged goods. And so that's a big motivating factor for me and my longtime friend, Nick Brown, who was a real support to me when it was tough. There is someone in this room actually right now who was also a good support to me, but he will acknowledge himself he didn't understand it because he'd never been through it. And that was the insight that came to me on a chance conversation really when I was in Prospect Park, which is a psychiatric hospital in Reading. It's a shithole area, it's grim, it was just before Christmas. It's one of the most depressing places you can go, even if you're feeling great. And so when you're sitting there feeling depressed and embarrassed about feeling depressed, it's a pretty grim place to be. But I'd sat there for 2 hours, there were no nurses available, and I said to them, look, I understand, my mum was a nurse, I know what the NHS has to deal with. And they said, well, you can talk to this guy, he's an admin assistant. So he took me into a room, sat me down, and he said, I'm not supposed to do this, but can I tell you my story? And I said, of course. I wasn't quite as, I probably just went, of course, because I was really down at the time. So effectively, his parents had died quite young. He'd inherited a load of money, moved to Spain with his wife. First 6 months, brilliant. After 6 months, loss of purpose, felt completely lacking in energy. Nothing made him happy. Tried to kill himself twice, and then came back to work in mental health in Reading, in this shithole psychiatric hospital. No, sorry, a psychiatric hospital in a shithole part of Reading.
Yeah, let's be clear on that.
So I came out and I spoke to my wife in the car, and I said, that's the first time I've spoken to someone when I've looked him in the eye and thought, you actually know how I feel. And so that's really the idea that's at the heart of I'm Not Okay, because what we're .uk, which is that you have to have been through something to really understand it. I've spoken to an amazing woman called Alison Greenwood, who 30 years clinical psychologist, has set up her own charity. And she said to me, she said, I can diagnose and I can treat and I can provide therapy, but I can't understand how it feels. And so that's the thing that I think is most crucial, and it's the reason why we've created a concept where we're going to create a network. We've got about 80 people sign up to be companions. So all people who've had lived experiences, whether that be of depression, anxiety, it could be more extreme as it is in the case of myself and Nick, but just suicidal thoughts, suicidal plans actually. So yeah, that's what we're trying to do, and we've been obviously speaking to Annabelle and Lorraine and Sue at NABS. Names aren't always the best for me. About how we bring that out to the business and help people, because ultimately I'm finally get up to the point now I'm grateful it happened, because I've learned things I would never have learned otherwise, and I can put myself in the shoes of my 3 friends and know how they felt. I can't bring them back, but we can try and stop that happening to other people.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks for sharing that. Lorraine, so why don't you tell everyone a little bit about why this is such a hot issue for NABS at the moment? It has been for a very long time, but particularly now at the moment.
Sure. So, how many of you know or heard of NABS? Can I just get a sense? Okay, great. I mean, you might have have some interaction with it or have some or heard of it, but it is fundamentally there to advance the mental wellness of people within our industry, and we are supported by the industry through organisations who will donate to NABS. And the work that we do is across 3 areas. We provide one-to-one support through our mechanisms like our advice line or our therapeutic interventions, for example, and then we help to develop mindsets for people, so a bit more of that preventative space, connecting people on coach-led in safe spaces through coach-led topics. Sorry, that's coach-led on sort of topics that are affecting us at an industry level, and then connecting people through things like our do sort of mentoring and fundraising model. And NABS, after the All-In census findings, we decided to carry out a piece of research across the summer, which is a consultation with our community. So finding out a bit more about what's going on for people who might not be engaged with NABS and who are engaged with NABS in terms of their mental wellness. And we have a range of hypotheses that we came up with to test that, and we've done some deep dive conversations and also some surveys. A report's going out at the end of this month to the industry, which will share our findings, and we are making some recommendations and are currently collaborating with leadership teams at the moment on that. But I guess the main thing for us is because we're living in this, volatile environment now. The world isn't changing. The world's kind of gone on its head since, COVID, and that isn't changing. And work pressures are rising. There's commercial tensions. So there's these compounding pressures that are affecting people within our industry, and the expectations on what people want from organisations and from managers is also evolving. So these things are colliding, and so that's why it's really important for NABS to dig a bit deeper on that and find out, well, where can we support and make that difference with people?
You mentioned there, there are some macro conditions that means, mental health crisis is very pertinent for everyone. Yeah. But there was some data in a McKinsey report that said, particularly this industry, and media's grouped together with telcos and telecoms, but versus other industries or sectors, we index much higher for mental health problems and issues. So what is it about our industry that causes that, do we think?
I've seen the data, and thank you for sharing that. I'm also, just to say, I had 27 years working in media. I didn't suffer from any pressure. I didn't feel pressure at work. I actually quite enjoyed it when it got difficult, and maybe I'm just a bit weird like that. As soon as that went, I struggled because I didn't have anything to sort of fight against, I suppose. But certainly working in an agency, I think there's a real onus on ISBA to tell their members to recognise the pressures that they put on agency staff, but in particular, but also people at media owners too, because there's quite a lot of direct dealings. So, yeah, I think there's our industry compared to other industries. I'm doing some work with a company called Social Marks now, is lagging behind, frankly. So we've looked at banking, insurance, law, and management consultancy, and they've been on this for a long time. They've been on this for about 6 years, and it's looking at broader social impact, but actually the well-being of their people it's a much higher mark than you get in our businesses. And there's a whole set of reasons for that. They've had a more structured approach to it, they've invested more, and ultimately I think there's a number of things that I think will help improve the situation in our business. I think supporting NABS and allowing them to be the hub, because I went to the NABS support line and I got fantastic email. As soon as you drop the S word as well, you get a fantastic email back, you get a call. But then I emailed to and from 3 or 4 different people, had calls, and they sent me a link to choose a therapist, and I couldn't even buy a pint of milk at the time. So choosing a therapist was beyond me, so I just went, I can't do that. And that's when someone by my side would have helped. But yeah, we are a long way behind, and I think there's pressures from clients. We're a very young industry as well, so I think there's a lot of challenges that have come about because of COVID and hybrid working as well. But it's also given us the license to talk about this stuff. So I don't know if I'd have felt comfortable talking about all of this 4 or 5 years ago. I don't know. But what I do know is that our industry as a whole has got an awful lot of work to do to support its people better.
I mean, what do you think we're doing well so far as an industry? And where do you think are the areas that we need some focus? You'll have seen some stuff in your consultation, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think we're doing well in terms of, we're a creative industry, obviously there's, we've got, variety is exciting, it's a joy to be in when you're feeling well. I think where we lag is when we're not feeling so great, that actually, are we actually taking everyone with us? So some of the things that are coming through are around we've got a lot of good policies in our industry. Our industry is good at sort of initiatives and going, right, that's an issue, let's get behind it. But turning that then into practice in organisations is where there's gaps, and there's making sure that actually that policy that you've implemented because of that macro situation, what does that mean in reality for people on the ground? How is that translating? How are they know how to get the support? The other crucial area for us that's coming through is around managers. The expectations on managers has shifted. And also, some of that could be because of the talent crisis. People are getting over-promoted quite early. But are we investing in managers to train them up? So technical skills, okay, that's one way, but also because of the hybrid working, the old traditions of, how we trained people can't be relied on anymore, so we have to get a bit more creative about that. But there's, managers are picking up far more about, mental health, and their expectations on managers to support on that has changed. So I think some of the early careers are coming through and seeing the managers are kind of overwhelmed. So we need to make sure that the managers are fully supported to be able to provide their own self-care, but also the support of the team.
You mentioned training there, and obviously the manifesto was around mental health first aid training. And Paul, you talked about not, perhaps years gone by, being comfortable talking about some of these things. It's probably fair to most of us that we don't talk about mental health in the workplace the same way we might physical health. And Lorraine, I know one of the outputs from the consultation talks about the high proportion of people. She's struggling with that door. Yeah, it's been a bit of a problem, that one. Oh dear. Don't worry, you can run across the front. It's okay.
Make a point.
Thanks, Lisa. That's all right. One of the points was around, people still will not call in sick, and give mental health as a reason, they'll still make something up around their physical health. We're still not talking in the workplace. And one of the core things about mental health first aid training was about equipping people with the language to be fluent in the different types of mental health conditions and how to talk about them more freely. So I'd just love to get your view on mental health first training, first and foremost. Have you done it? Have you been around people who've done it? What your view on it is?
I hate the term mental health first aider. I think it trivialises the situation.
I do too, yeah.
Even mental health allies I struggle with a bit, to be honest with you, and I think the evidence is being borne out, and I think some work being done which shows that it's having very little impact for the reasons that I said earlier. The last person, certainly I didn't experience it when I was at work, but if I had, the last person I want to go and speak to is someone I work with. So I think there has to be a degree of separation from who you talk to. I think, and what your concept, and we've chatted briefly about this, we did do a bit of preparation. I think the concept is really good, but my view is that rather than trying to train more people to be mental health allies, I think every single person in the business should be trained to have more awareness of their own mental health and the signs to look for. Because I'd never experienced anything like this before in my life, and it took me months to realise that I was actually depressed. It was like a slow, steady decline. But there were signals, and I should have recognised those. And if I'd been trained, maybe I would have done. But it's also recognising the signs in other people. So my very good friend who I lost at the start of 2020, he hung himself 3 weeks into the first lockdown. He'd gone quiet for a few weeks. So I couldn't even drag him out to go for a bite to eat or a beer. And I realise now that it was because he was closing in on himself. So whilst I think mental health allies is a well-intentioned direction to take, I'd much rather see us make a proper investment into getting training across the board for every single person. We get trained in DDS or systems or so why not get trained about how if people are first and they're our most valuable resource, well, why don't we teach ourselves how to look after ourselves? So I think that's thing number one. And then I think I really do believe, and it's the reason why I think there needs to be genuine investment, as there are in other professional services, into the well-being of the people that work within them, is to support an organisation like NABS, which can be one degree of separation away from work, and that allows people to talk more freely, albeit they talk with someone one-to-one in complete confidentiality, because it doesn't really matter if you've had a morning's training or you've got your lanyard or whatever it may be. And I'm sorry if that sounds really demeaning to mental health allies, because I know it's well-intentioned, but I would never have gone to speak to someone at work. I know someone who is a very senior woman in industry. She was struggling with something, and her mental health ally was a PA. You're not going to talk to your PA about how you feel. You're just not. So there needs to be if we do more of it, it's more of the same. And I think we're just going to continue, and 2 or 3 years down the line, we'll be where we were 2 or 3 years ago. So I think to make a proper sea change, we have to look at it in a different way, and we have to find ways of investing properly in our people to support them, because life is hard, right? I know that now. And there are lots of people that work any one time. I think there's about 15% of the workforce are going through some sort of mental health difficulty. So that's my two penneth on.
And I would agree with you on the point on you might perhaps not likely to go and talk to a colleague, but I think one of the residual benefits is simply being able to have more open conversations, understanding the definitions. It won't necessarily be the person you talk to, but knowing that they're there.
100%. And I think what Mental Health Allies has done is it's raised awareness, and it's brought the discussion out into the open, but it's not delivered on true understanding. It certainly doesn't really translate into the action, which is what Lorraine mentioned earlier on.
What would you like to see next, Lorraine?
So we're working on this at NABS. We're trying to see, I think there's a lack of understanding around mental health. I think as an industry we use a language like, I'm stressed, I'm this, I'm that, quite freely. What do we actually mean? And to Paul's point, you can have good stress. It can be, for the benefit. It can, for the benefit of you and your motivation and the work output. But it's when it tips into the I suppose, over that optimum sort of threshold, that it becomes more impactful. So there's education, I think, around language, getting a base level understanding in the industry about it, and also looking at it from people have different interpretations, but there'll be an intersectional lens that people need to apply as well, because people have different cultural perspectives on it, lived experience on it, and so we need to just take that into view as well, which could also be a barrier for mental health allies.
Great, we're just about out of time, but I'd just like to ask one more question, which is, you've got a room here of future leaders and people who are already influential in their organisations, so what would you ask them to do? What can everybody do to help further this cause? Other than give lots of money to
So I suppose when we release our report at the end of October, take a look at it and, push it in your organisation. Put it to your HR. Maybe there's a senior leader, and have a look. But also NABS we're currently sort of distilling what that means for NABS over the next 2 years, and we're thinking about, well, how can we engage much more on a community level? How can we get people who are active in the space, who want to do more in the space, working with NABS? So we used to have things like ambassadors in the past, things like that. So there could be an opportunity there. So yes, LinkedIn with me as well if you want to, and we can keep in touch and we can go from there. That's it from me.
Yeah.
Any final point, Paul?
Yeah. Look, it's a people business, and one of the things that I missed was being in contact with people pretty much every day, and I know it's different now with hybrid working, and I think that brings its own challenges. So, people talk about checking in, but genuinely check in. And there was actually a really smart little change just to because I used to ask people how they're doing. Don't ask them how they're doing, ask them how they're feeling, because that's a really difficult question to answer without actually saying how you feel. If that makes sense.
Yes.
And the other one that I'd like to try and use is, are you okay? Because if there's a moment's hesitation, then they're not, and no one's ever 100%, but you can always ask, what are you, 90, 80, what sort of day? I had a really bad day yesterday, first time in months. I don't know why, there was no reason, nothing had changed, but I was just really, really not okay yesterday. So just checking in with people and asking that question, and if they say to you, you're not okay, then right, do you want to talk about it? And smile to people as well, that always helps.
Well, we can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Please thank Paul and Lorraine for